If you're autistic, you suspect you're autistic, or this algorithm thinks you're autistic, you will no doubt find yourself watching videos of people like me who are autistic. And that in itself can come with some challenges for you, because you may be led to believe the people you're watching are different to how they are in real life. Now, a percentage of that, someone like me is a great example. I'm 51 years old at the time of making this video, and I've been masking my whole life. I only found out I was autistic 5 years ago. And so this masking, trying to act a certain way, is somewhat automatic. And despite this, I do try to stop. I try to prevent myself doing it. And then there's another side of this where someone like me, I'm a very small channel, but I have been making content for a couple of years on other platforms, as well as here, another channel that I had. And over that time, you learn to be a different way on camera. You make videos, you look back at them, and you make adjustments. And in my case, I'm pretty sure that has made me come across more quote-unquote normal. And it wasn't until a few days ago I'd done some tests, some evaluations with my therapist. It's only new that I'm starting to see her here in Finland, but she's also Australian. And she did a few tests, but I just want to focus on one in particular. And when I got the results back, I was shocked. I'm going to share that with you today in the hope of trying to normalise mental health and issues that people have, but also raising the curtain here and pointing out that I don't have my shit together. I'm not like this person who has all the answers. I have as many problems as anyone else. And if you're late diagnosed autistic, like I said, or you suspect you are, you're probably going to relate to this as well. And I'm also going to talk about coping strategies that I believe have influenced and changed the results of this test, which we'll talk about. So what it was a checklist or an assessment for PTSD. And I was pretty shocked. I guess it explains a lot for me, but I've never had this official assessment done. And it came back for the total score. It said, it named it as severe. So my case of PTSD is severe. And you'll see here it says re-experiencing severe, avoidance normal, negative alteration severe, and hyperarousal as severe. So yes, as I say, explains a lot, explains why I struggle with so many things. I struggle dealing with people at times, and also this seeming normal probably throws people. They probably don't see me as remotely fragile in any way. But what I want to focus on here is the avoidance, the normal score of avoidance. How the hell is that possible? And believe me when I say this isn't by accident. Around about 10 years ago, I read this book called The Happiness Trap by Dr. Russ Harrison, pretty sure that's who it is. I'll show it on the screen now. And it's talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. And I'm pretty sure I'm crediting him correctly. He's the one who talks about this thing, about how our minds work. And there's plenty of times, I'm talking about avoidance here, where we're thinking about going somewhere, an event where people are, or a shop, what doesn't matter, some place you open the door and have to go into, and there's this fear and your mind is telling you, do not go into that room, do not go to that place, just avoid the whole thing. And the reason that happens is that our minds are a keeping us alive machine. Can't think of the right word. Our minds are designed to keep us alive and avoid threats, which was derived from basically when we were cavemen or any of that kind of era. You think about it, if there was some strange place we'd never been before, our minds would go crazy saying, don't go there, because in that time there could quite likely be a saber-tooth tiger that's going to eat us and we're going to die. So it's a self-preservation thing. Might find this hard to believe, but in this day and age, there isn't any saber-toothed tigers, and a room with people in it might be uncomfortable, but we are not going to die. But our mind doesn't know that. It doesn't know the difference. It just sees this unknown thing as danger. So back when I studied 1 year of psychology at uni, I passed that year, just by the way, but there were life circumstances prevented me from keeping going, but I'll talk about that another time. And at that time, one huge issue I had was the auditorium, the lecture theatre. If it was my preference that I would get there early and sit somewhere and I'd feel comfortable if I was the first person there. But when you're going from one class to another, you have to rock up 5 minutes before at the most, or right on time. And so imagine this auditorium where you come in on the ground floor, and on the right-hand side, there's all of the seats and all the people sitting there, and the lecturer or the facilitator on the left. And you walk in, and he looks at you, or he or she look at you, and you look, and feels like all of the people are looking at you, and you're, oh, and where do I sit? Oh, I can't sit. I don't know that person. There's this whole freaky thing that goes on when you walk into this auditorium, lecture theatre, whatever you want to call it. And so this is what I'm talking about here. How did I get past that? I realised what the threat was, thinking I'm going to die. Really, that's what the fear is. The fear that people are going to look at me, not life-threatening, but it's knowing that and then doing it anyway. So knowing there's a threat, knowing that I feel intimidated, don't want to go in there, and just taking the leap. And again, we're not jumping out of a plane here. This is the thing. And just going in and walking into this place. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but this particular skill, it comes from DBT, and the skill is called opposite action. So doing the opposite of what you think you should do. I mean, you should use caution here, but for the most part, if you think about most situations where this would be the case, and you think of going into a room like that and realising why that you're scared and then just going in there anyway, it results in what I've shown on this test here. The avoidance being normal is for 10 years of doing this. And I don't know if this is disappointing to say, but it never really went away. This desire to avoid places doesn't go away. But if it's the same thing, so even going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I love Jiu-Jitsu. I did 8 years in total, got to purple belt. But no matter what club that I went to, every single time I'd get this anxiety about going there. I know all the people and stuff. And I noticed that when the club back in my hometown, the first club that I went to, if I pulled up and there was hardly any cars, I felt some kind of relief. I don't know what ideally you want more training partners, not less, but I felt some kind of relief, and I realised that wasn't a good thing. It wasn't good to think, oh, there's less people, therefore it's a good thing. But back then, I guess my desire to learn jiu-jitsu was more than my fear of walking into the place. And back then, this was before I learned about opposite action or even read The Happiness Trap. And so I guess back then I was just unknowingly doing this opposite action thing. And also another point I want to make here is that something I'm very aware of when I'm making a video and I'm giving advice and saying things to people, I'm very aware to not use anecdotal evidence. So if it's something I've done and succeeded at, I don't just go, oh, this worked for me, so therefore it will for you. Just as an aside, because that's not good. You think about it, because if that's the case, right, if you wanted to learn how to get rich like Bill Gates, you can't, right? But if he tried to tell you, just do what I did, you're not going to result in the same thing. If you think about why that would be, you're not going to be able to invent a new software system that nobody else has come up with. That ship has sailed. So when it's anecdotal, or when it's just, survivorship bias is what this is called, when someone says, oh, just do what I did. So that's not what I'm doing here. I'm naming a therapy. I'm naming things from particular therapies that are known to work, and I'm merely pointing out, oh yeah, here's this thing that works for people, and it worked for me as well. And there's another thing that I want to address as well for autistic people, that to realise who is telling you what's wrong with you and where they're getting the information. So, and this is not an isolate, this sounds like anecdotal, but this is a common thing that people report, not just autistic people, by the way. Often someone who's introverted will say the same thing, where they will go to some kind of clinician and report their symptoms or their struggles, and then they'll just say, oh, you're just this. Such a common thing. It happened to me so much, where people would insist that I had borderline personality disorder. And okay, up until I discovered autism, I thought, well, okay, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. These people are trained in that. They're not autistic. So, of course, they're not going to see the autism. They're not trained to see it. They don't know it. They're only, at the best, would know the stereotypical symptoms of autism. So then, interesting thing happened to me where I was, well, let's just say in hospital. Maybe I'll explain this another time. But I'm in hospital and I'm about to be discharged, and a psychiatrist comes to see me, and I announced to him two things. I announced to him that I'm autistic, and that the therapist I was seeing at the time, this is about 2 years ago, the therapist I was seeing said something about CPTSD, complex PTSD. But I'd never been diagnosed with it, but I sort of talked to him that I'm pretty sure I had it. And then, now here's a pretty severe trigger warning. This thing I'm about to say is relating to childhood trauma, that experienced something that happened to me. So I'm telling you because if or when I ever tell people this story, they're horrified. You're going to be horrified when I tell you this, if you still stick around. It's something that happened to me when I was 5 years old. But it doesn't mean anything to me, which is weird. That particular incident, for some reason, doesn't choke me up. It doesn't upset me, unlike everything else. But anyway, so without going into graphic detail, but when I was 5 years old, an adult picked me up and threw me back into my bedroom, and they threw me a little bit too hard, and it bounced off the bed into the wall, and I was knocked out cold. And that's clearly child abuse, but this was 1980, so things were a little bit different back then. And I remember they were trying to get rid of the bump on my head afterwards. So that's pretty severe. And when I mentioned that to this psychiatrist, this is all relevant. When I mentioned this to the psychiatrist, he asked me if I have flashbacks, because I'm talking about CPTSD. I mentioned that event, and he asked if I have flashbacks. And I thought he meant about that. And I said no. And that's it. This is a 5-minute conversation, by the way. And at the end of it, he said, he didn't say anything to me. He didn't say, yeah, I get you're autistic, or, oh, that's interesting. He didn't say anything to me, but he filled out a form or whatever. And then my doctor, my general practitioner, family doctor, when I went to see him afterwards, read it out to me. And this guy had heard everything I said and wrote that I just had borderline personality disorder. Nothing about PTSD, nothing about autism, none of those things. And I found that really invalidating. And that's why when I've got the results to this PTSD assessment and I rang my partner to talk about it, and she was like, yeah, I've always thought that you had PTSD. She's like, oh, that's like saying to me, oh, I've got blonde hair. She's Finnish, for context. So, but that's what these people, this is what the point of this story is. When someone invalidates us, it can have that effect. It can kind of gaslight you into thinking there's nothing wrong with you. And also, I've got to say, look, there's this label that I have now, an official one, so nobody can say to me, no, you don't have that. But if someone does try, so someone will do it to you or me with autism, recognise they don't know what they're talking about. You can decide whether you want to have that argument or whether you want to say, oh, really? Do you know much about it? And same with this now. If the subject came up and PTSD came up and I mentioned that, and if someone said, oh, you don't have that, I'd be like, really? How do you know that? and just wait to see what they say. And then they're quite likely going to say something along the lines of that I look fine. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, you don't need assessments. You just go by how people look. Well, that's good news, isn't it? We can just all be diagnosed from a photograph or just from a video call. You don't need to actually see a doctor ever again. So, hope that makes sense. So this is the whole thing that I've discussed here, is that people like me, we can seem normal, we've got our crap together, and we may not have. So if you see people like me on here and you think, oh, this is how I should be like and everything, this is just a mask, this is a facade, it's not really who I am. I have as much faults or more than the next person. I can have a bit of a short fuse at times, I can be a bit sensitive at times, and wow, I've had some pretty severe bouts of poor mental health in my time. And this is just one of 6 assessments that I had that all came back with, not exactly good news, but not exactly surprising news.